Ryan Weston never stopped for anyone, until the day he knelt on a busy sidewalk to tie the shoelaces of a little girl who didn't expect help from anyone at all. Ryan Weston was used to walking fast and thinking faster. His world was a perfectly tuned system of precision, efficiency, and structure. That morning was no different. He had a shareholders' meeting across town and was already a few minutes behind schedule. His assistant had just called to remind him that the board would not wait, and as he strode across the marble-paved square, his mind was already working through talking points and stock projections. He didn't notice the crowds thinning out near the edge of the plaza, nor did he pay much attention to the growing stillness. He was locked into his routine, his thoughts sharp and unbending. Then someone, caught the corner of his vision. It wasn't movement that stopped him, but the absence of it. A little girl stood on the pavement, perfectly still, her head lowered and her shoulders stiff. She couldn't have been older than 5. Her dress was a little faded, her blonde hair tied back with a crooked ribbon, and her shoes, pink and worn, were untied. She wasn't crying or calling out for help. She simply stood there, eyes fixed on her own feet, as if unsure whether she was allowed to take another step. Most passers-by had already looked past her. Ryan almost did too. He had somewhere to be. But he stopped. Something in her posture, in the quiet determination not to cry, held him there. She wasn't causing a scene. She wasn't begging. She was waiting. He took a cautious step forward, unsure what to say or whether she would run. But she didn't move. When he reached her, he crouched down, not a motion he made often or comfortably, and noticed the laces on both her shoes had come undone. She looked at him then, her large brown eyes meeting his with quiet calm. He didn't ask questions. He simply reached out and began tying her shoes, slow and careful, as if every movement might scare her away. She didn't flinch. She didn't speak until he finished the second knot. Then she said one soft word, "Thank you." That single word hit him harder than he expected. It wasn't just gratitude, it was surprise. She hadn't expected help. She had expected to stand there indefinitely, forgotten in a crowd that moved too fast to care. Ryan stood, still looking at her. "Are you lost?" he asked, his voice lower than usual. She hesitated, then said, "I don't know." There was something about the way she said it, not with fear, but with honesty, that made his pulse shift. "Where are your parents?" he tried again. She shrugged. "Mommy's asleep." She didn't wake up. The words landed with a weight that cut through everything. Ryan didn't ask more. He didn't look at his phone. He didn't even think about the meeting he was now officially missing. Instead, he looked around the square. No one had stopped. No one was watching. He reached out his hand and said gently, "Let's get something warm to drink." She nodded and took his hand. And just like that, Ryan Weston, the man who had built an empire on never being interrupted, was walking away from his schedule, guided by a 5-year-old girl with untied shoes and eyes that saw more than a child ever should. The cafe they stepped into was quiet and warm, its soft lighting and smell of fresh pastries a comforting contrast to the cold detachment of the city outside. Ryan held the door open as the girl walked in ahead of him, her small hand still wrapped loosely around his finger. She didn't seem afraid, just cautious, like she'd learned to study a room before choosing a place to exist within it. He guided her to a booth in the corner, away from the windows, where the light spilled onto the table in soft golden streaks. She climbed into the seat without a word, her feet not quite reaching the edge of the cushion. Ryan sat across from her and for a moment, they just looked at each other, two strangers with nothing in common but that strange sense of being exactly where neither of them had planned to be. A waitress came over and greeted them with a smile, but Ryan barely looked at the menu. "Hot chocolate," he said, glancing at the girl. "And something sweet." She didn't argue. She didn't ask for anything. She just nodded. When the waitress left, Ryan leaned forward, resting his hands on the edge of the table. "Do you remember your full name?" he asked gently. The girl tilted her head. Mommy called me Lily. Her voice was barely above a whisper. But I don't know the rest. Lily, he repeated, trying the name out like a delicate object. It suited her, simple, quiet, and unassuming. She traced one finger along the pattern on the tabletop. I had a last name once. But I don't remember it now. Ryan felt a strange chill move through him. He'd handled some of the most ruthless boardroom negotiations imaginable, but nothing in his life had prepared him for the heartbreak of a child forgetting their own identity. Where did you last see your mom? He asked, trying to stay steady. Lily didn't look up. She was tired. She laid down in our room and wouldn't wake up. The people came in a car with lights and took her. Then I was with ladies who told me I had to sleep with other kids. But I didn't want to. So I left. Ryan blinked slowly. She said it so plainly, with no emotion, like she'd already repeated it to herself 100 times. She wasn't trying to gain his sympathy. She was just telling the truth. How long ago was that? He asked. Lily shrugged. I don't know. A lot of sleeps. Maybe 6. The hot chocolate arrived, topped with a swirl of whipped cream and a sprinkle of cinnamon. Lily stared at it, then carefully wrapped both hands around the mug as if afraid it would be taken away. She sipped quietly, her eyes never leaving the cup. Ryan watched her for a long moment before pulling out his phone and typing a quiet message to his assistant, "Cancel all meetings today. Do not reschedule until further notice." He ended the message and looked at Lily again. Do you have anyone else? Family? She shook her head. Mommy said it was just us now. Before that it was no one. There was a long silence between them. Ryan had no idea what he was doing. He was a man who thrived on control, on logic, on measurable outcomes. But nothing about this moment could be measured. All he knew was that he couldn't walk away. Would it be okay if I helped you for a little while? He asked carefully. Just until we find out where you're supposed to be. Lily looked up at him for the first time with something new in her expression, something uncertain, but hopeful. She nodded once, then went back to her cocoa. And just like that, a man who had built his life on predictability found himself taking his first step into the unknown. The drive back to Ryan's penthouse was quiet, but not uncomfortable. Lily sat in the back seat, hugging a small paper bag from the cafe with a chocolate croissant inside. She didn't speak, but she watched the world outside the window with wide, curious eyes. Ryan checked the rearview mirror more times than. Ryan left the cafe with Lily by his side, the warmth of her small hand and is still surprising him every time she held on without hesitation. The street outside was busier now, but the world felt quieter to him somehow, as if the chaos of his usual routine had been turned down and replaced with something more deliberate. He flagged down a car, helped Lily into the back seat, and gave his driver a new destination, not his office, not the boardroom where he was expected, but his apartment. He wasn't entirely sure why. He just knew the thought of handing her over to strangers felt wrong, even if those strangers were professionals. Lily didn't question him. She sat silently beside him, watching the passing buildings with calm curiosity, like she was memorizing a city she didn't expect to stay in for long. His apartment was modern and minimal, a skyline view penthouse that had always been more aesthetic than personal. As the door opened, Lily stepped inside cautiously, not as someone arriving at a new home, but as someone who wasn't sure if she belonged. She didn't touch anything. She stood quietly, looking around with wide eyes, and then sat on the edge of the couch, her legs dangling over the side. Ryan loosened his tie, suddenly aware of how cold the space looked. There were no soft blankets, no family photos, no hint that a child could find comfort here. He opened the fridge and quickly realized he had nothing suitable for a 5-year-old. That didn't surprise him. What surprised him was how much it bothered him now. He ordered groceries immediately, simple things, like milk and cereal and fruit. Then he returned to the living room where Lily was still sitting in the exact same spot, her hands folded in her lap. He sat beside her, trying to relax his posture, and asked if she wanted to take a nap. She shook her head and said softly, "I only sleep when I know I'm not going to be moved again." The word stunned him. He had assumed she was tired, possibly exhausted. But it wasn't about physical rest for her. It was about trust. About the fear of waking up somewhere new again. He didn't know what to say, so instead, he walked to the hallway closet, grabbed the softest throw he could find, and brought it back to her. He gently draped it over her shoulders. She blinked at him, then slowly leaned against the pillow beside her, clutching the blanket close. It wasn't sleep, not really, but it was the closest thing to safety she'd known in days. He watched her for a moment before pulling out his laptop. While she rested, he started searching: hospitals, social services, missing child reports, anything connected to a girl named Lily with no last name and a mother named Celine. It didn't take long to find a report about a woman who had died in her apartment just over a week ago, with a note that a minor child had been removed from the home. The child had disappeared 2 nights later from a temporary care facility. His jaw tightened. The system had already failed her once. She was his responsibility now, at least until someone proved otherwise. That evening, after Lily had quietly accepted a bowl of cereal and curled up on the couch with a cartoon playing softly in the background, Ryan sat at his desk and called his lawyer. He didn't explain much, just that he had a child staying with him, and he needed to understand what legal rights he had to protect her. He gave her full name, or what he believed it was. He asked the lawyer to dig into the donor program he'd anonymously contributed to years ago, though he wasn't sure why that part had surfaced in his thoughts. By the time the sun set, Lily was asleep with her head against a cushion, the blanket still pulled up to her chin. Ryan turned off the TV and stood watching her for a long time. He didn't feel overwhelmed, or lost, or afraid. He felt steady. And that surprised him more than anything. Because in all the plans he had ever made, not one of them involved a little girl with untied shoes and a voice quiet enough to break him open. The following morning, the apartment was bathed in early light. Ryan woke earlier than usual, not because of his alarm, but because he had barely slept. His mind had been caught between quiet worry and an overwhelming need to understand what came next. He moved quietly through the apartment, unsure if Lily would still be there or if she would vanish like a dream he'd imagined too vividly. But when he stepped into the living room, she was right where he had left her, curled up on the couch, blanket tangled around her legs, one small hand tucked under her cheek. She was still wearing the same clothes from the day before, her hair tangled, but her face was peaceful. It was the first time he truly saw her as a child, not a burden or a mystery, but someone who had trusted him enough to fall asleep without fear. He let her sleep and brewed coffee while checking his email. The usual flood of board updates, legal summaries, and scheduling conflicts now felt distant and irrelevant. The lawyer had responded to his late-night message with a request to speak urgently. Ryan dialed the number immediately. The conversation was quiet, private, and, by the end, life-altering. The lawyer confirmed what Ryan had only half suspected: the fertility program he had invested in years ago had matched his profile with a single recipient, a woman named Celine Brooks. The name froze him in place. He remembered her, not vividly, but enough. She had been kind, reserved, determined to raise a child on her own. She hadn't wanted money or a contract, just a chance. According to the file, Celine had given birth to a daughter. No name was listed for the child, but the timeline aligned perfectly with Lily's age. Ryan didn't speak for several seconds. The lawyer asked if he wanted to pursue paternity testing or legal guardianship. He only said one word: yes. When Lily woke, he was still sitting at the table, the coffee untouched. She rubbed her eyes, looked around as if expecting to be somewhere else, and when she saw him, she didn't speak. She just sat up and wrapped the blanket tighter around her shoulders. He asked if she was hungry, and she nodded, still silent. He poured her a bowl of cereal and sat across from her as she ate in slow, thoughtful bites. I talked to someone about your mom, he said gently. She stopped eating, but didn't look up. Her name was Celine, right? Lily nodded without a word. He hesitated, then continued. I think I might have known her. A long time ago. Before you were born. Now she looked up, her expression unreadable. Did she like you? He smiled softly. I think so. We didn't stay in touch, but I never forgot her. Lily didn't respond, but she kept eating, a little faster this time. When she finished, she picked up the bowl and walked it over to the sink. Ryan watched her, surprised again by her independence. She was so small, but so used to taking care of herself. He cleared his throat. I want you to stay here for now. I'm going to talk to some people and make sure that's okay. But you'll have your own room, your own bed. Would that be all right? She stood still, her back to him, then turned slowly. I don't have anywhere else. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't desperation. It was a fact. And that made it heavier. That afternoon, Ryan turned his guest room into something softer, new sheets, a small desk, a shelf filled with a few toys he had delivered the same day. When Lily walked in and saw it, she didn't run to it or scream with joy. She simply walked over to the bed, sat down, and whispered, "This is mine." He nodded. She didn't cry, but her voice trembled when she said thank you. As the day ended, Ryan knew his life had changed. Not in some abstract way, not like a new contract or a major acquisition. This was real. This was personal. Lily wasn't just a stranger who needed help. She was his daughter. And every instinct in him told him that whatever came next, he would face it for her. Ryan sat in his office that evening, though it didn't feel like his office anymore. It was still filled with sleek furniture, polished surfaces, and muted lighting, but something had shifted. The presence of a child in his home had softened the atmosphere in ways he never could have anticipated. Her tiny shoes by the door, her quiet humming as she colored in the other room, even the sound of her cereal spoon tapping the bowl that morning, all of it had left an imprint. He wasn't used to silence being meaningful. Now it carried weight. The report from his attorney sat on the table in front of him, unopened. He already knew what it said. He had been the anonymous donor. Celine had chosen to raise their daughter alone, and now that she was gone, Lily was, by every legal and moral definition, his. He thought about the past, not with regret, but with a strange ache. Years ago, when he signed that contract to donate, it hadn't seemed like anything more than a technical arrangement. He wasn't ready for fatherhood then, and he hadn't imagined it would ever come back to him. But it had, and now it lived in his guest room, sleeping with a stuffed rabbit under her chin. He couldn't stop thinking about how quietly she had adapted, how she didn't complain, didn't ask for anything, didn't even seem surprised when he said she could stay. Later that night, Ryan made a second call to his lawyer and asked about expedited guardianship. It wouldn't be easy, especially without a formal claim filed by another relative, but the lawyer believed it was possible. There's no record of other family, she said. But if someone comes forward, the courts will want to know what's best for Lily. That's all that matters now. That idea, that he had to prove he was the best option, unsettled him. He wasn't a parent. He hadn't read the books or practiced bedtime routines or learned how to braid hair. But he had shown up when no one else did. And he wasn't going anywhere. The next morning, Lily woke up and came into the kitchen in her pajamas, her hair a mess of soft tangles. She rubbed her eyes and sat down at the table without saying anything. He slid a bowl of oatmeal in front of her, unsure if she'd like it. She took one bite, then nodded silently in approval. It was the first time she'd eaten without hesitation. He smiled and poured her some juice. After breakfast, he asked if she wanted to go out. She looked up, uncertain. To where? She asked. Someplace with books, he replied. And crayons. And snacks. Somewhere just for you. The children's store they visited was quiet and bright, with shelves filled with picture books, small tables with puzzles, and soft music playing in the background. Lily didn't rush through the aisles. She moved carefully, touching things like they might disappear. He told her she could pick out 5 things. She only chose 3, a book about a bear and his forest friends, a tin of colored pencils, and a small pink backpack. Back home, she filled the backpack and carried it from room to room, like she was preparing herself for something even she didn't understand. He watched her carefully, giving her space, but always nearby. That afternoon, as he worked on his laptop in the corner of the living room, she brought her drawing pad to him and showed him a picture. It was a house, with 2 stick figures holding hands. One was tall, wearing a tie. The other was small, with a bow in her hair. She didn't say anything as he looked at it, but when he looked up and met her eyes, she smiled. It was small, hesitant, but real. Something inside him shifted then. Not all at once, not in a wave of emotion, but quietly, the way dawn edges out the dark. He was still learning what it meant to be a parent, still unsure of how to meet her needs, but one thing was absolutely clear. Lily wasn't just a responsibility. She was his daughter. And he was already hers. The days began to settle into a kind of rhythm that Ryan had never experienced before. His mornings were no longer consumed by rushing out the door or reading financial briefs over espresso. Instead, he woke earlier to the sound of soft footsteps padding across hardwood floors, or the whisper of Lily talking quietly to herself as she arranged her toys. He made her breakfast, something simple like toast with jam or fruit and oatmeal, and sat across from her while she ate, her small presence grounding him more than any board meeting ever had. Work hadn't disappeared entirely, but his priorities had shifted. He checked in with his team remotely, trusted his executives to carry out plans, and refused meetings that required travel or late hours. His assistant stopped questioning his calendar changes. The people around him were beginning to realize that something had changed. Lily, in her quiet way, was blossoming. She didn't speak much unless she was asked a direct question, but her eyes had started to brighten. She no longer hesitated before taking a seat on the couch. She hummed when she colored. She stopped looking around the room as if waiting to be moved again. Every small change was a sign that she was starting to feel safe. Ryan noticed it all, the way she gently lined up her new books on the shelf he'd given her, how she insisted on folding her pajamas every morning, and how she began to leave her drawings on his desk without a word, as if she was giving him pieces of herself to keep. One evening, just after dinner, Ryan received a call from his attorney. She had news: the formal guardianship hearing had been set for the following week. The courts were moving quickly, partly due to the lack of any competing claims and partly because Ryan had the resources and intent to take care of Lily without delay. Still, she reminded him that until the paperwork was signed, it wasn't final. The conversation left him more anxious than he expected. After hanging up, he walked into Lily's room, where she was arranging her pencils by color. She looked up and smiled faintly, sensing something was different. He sat on the floor beside her and explained, gently, that there would be a meeting soon with people who needed to understand why she should stay with him. She didn't seem scared, only curious. "Do I have to leave?" she asked. He shook his head slowly. "Not if I can help it." She thought for a moment. "Will they ask if I want to stay?" He nodded. "They might." She considered that carefully, then said, "Then I'll say yes." The simplicity of her trust shook him. That night, after she fell asleep with her pink backpack still clutched in one hand, Ryan sat alone in the living room. He stared out the tall windows, the city sparkling below, and let himself feel everything he had kept tucked away: the fear of failing her, the strange joy of being needed, and the quiet hope that he could build a life that included her, not as a temporary obligation, but as a permanent part of his world. The following day, they went to the park together. Lily ran for the first time since arriving, her laughter echoing across the green space as she chased birds and kicked leaves. Ryan watched her from a bench, hands in his lap, a subtle smile on his face. He wasn't thinking about business or investors. He was watching his daughter discover joy, and for the first time in years, that was more than enough. When she ran back to him, flushed and breathless, she said, "Do you think Mommy would like you?" He paused, surprised by the question. Then he nodded slowly. "I hope so." Lily reached out and took his hand without saying another word. That night, as she drifted to sleep, Ryan realized he had already made the decision the courts were preparing to confirm. He didn't just want to keep her safe. He wanted to raise her, love her, and be the person she deserved. And whatever the world required of him to make that happen, he would do it without hesitation. The morning of the guardianship hearing arrived quietly, without the thunder of anxiety Ryan had expected. The sky outside was overcast, casting a soft gray light over the apartment. Lily woke up earlier than usual, and instead of her usual silence, she walked into the kitchen and asked what they were doing today. Ryan crouched beside her and told her the truth in simple words. They were going to meet some people who needed to see how brave and strong she was, and how much she mattered. She didn't cry. She didn't ask questions. She just nodded and asked if she could bring her drawing of the house they had made together. He said yes, and she tucked it into her pink backpack as if it were the most important document in the world. The courthouse was tall and sterile, a building Ryan had visited before for contracts and disputes, never for anything this personal. He held Lily's hand tightly as they entered the waiting area. She looked small and out of place, but not afraid. She wore a simple dress, pale blue with a little bow at the waist, and her hair was freshly brushed, tucked behind her ears. He had never felt so protective in his life. The attorney arrived with calm professionalism, explaining how the hearing would go, what to expect, and reminding Ryan that the judge might speak to Lily directly. Inside the courtroom, the judge was kind but thorough. She reviewed the paperwork, asked about Lily's time in temporary care, and questioned Ryan about his decision to assume custody. He answered everything honestly. He told the truth about how he met Lily, how unprepared he had been, and how something changed the moment she looked up at him with those steady brown eyes. He told the judge that he hadn't expected to become a father, but that now he couldn't imagine anything else. Lily sat quietly next to him, feet swinging above the floor, her drawing held tightly in her lap. Then the judge looked at Lily and asked if she wanted to speak. Ryan leaned in and whispered, "Only if you want to." She stood up slowly, clutching the drawing in both hands, and walked to the front. The courtroom was silent. She unfolded the paper and held it up, showing the judge the picture of the house with two stick figures holding hands. "This is me and him," she said, pointing. "He makes my cereal the way I like it. He lets me pick my own books. And he doesn't move me when I'm sleeping. I don't want to go anywhere else." The judge didn't smile right away. She studied Lily for a long moment, then nodded. The rest of the hearing moved quickly after that. A decision was issued. Ryan Weston was granted legal guardianship, with full rights and responsibilities. It was done. As they walked out of the courthouse, Lily didn't say anything, but her grip on Ryan's hand was firmer than it had ever been. Outside on the steps, she finally spoke. "Does this mean I live with you now forever?" Ryan crouched down and looked her in the eyes. "Yes. Forever." She looked at him for a moment, as if checking to be sure, then threw her arms around his neck and whispered, "Okay." That evening, back home, Ryan cooked pasta, badly, overcooking the noodles, but Lily ate it without complaint. She spent the rest of the night drawing new pictures, this time of a bigger house with more people. She drew herself, Ryan, and even added a cat they didn't have yet. Before bed, she asked if she could call him Dad. He froze for a second, not because he didn't want to hear it, but because he wasn't sure he deserved it. But he nodded. She whispered the word once before curling under the blankets. And as she drifted to sleep, Ryan sat quietly in the doorway, heart full in a way that had nothing to do with success or money or power. He had walked into that cafe a stranger to her. Now he was her entire world. Spring arrived quietly, bringing with it longer days and a softness in the air that Ryan hadn't noticed in years. His world, once defined by schedules and margins, had shifted so completely that he barely recognized the man he used to be. Mornings were now filled with the smell of toast and laughter echoing down the hallway. His penthouse had changed too, not in the architecture or decor, but in spirit. There were now drawings on the fridge, little shoes by the front door, a backpack resting in the hallway, and a quiet warmth that came from knowing someone small and important was always waiting for him to come home. Lily had grown more confident. She talked more, asked more questions, and laughed freely. She had made a friend at school named Grace, and every evening, she told Ryan detailed stories about their imaginary adventures as if they were urgent news. He listened to every word. He started reading to her before bed, not just short picture books, but longer stories with chapters, because she said she liked stories that didn't end too fast. On weekends, they explored bookstores and parks. He took her to the lake once, and she asked if they could come back every year, just the two of them, no matter what. He promised they would. Julia, Celine's sister, came to visit often. She and Ryan developed a friendship built on shared care for the same child and a quiet grief that neither had quite processed. Julia told stories about Celine, filling in pieces of Lily's memory with kindness and truth. Sometimes, they sat together after Lily was asleep, just sharing silence or photos. There were no accusations between them. Only understanding. One Saturday afternoon, Lily and Ryan stood in front of the same cafe where they had met months before. She recognized it immediately. "This is where I found you," she said. Ryan smiled and replied, "I think it's where we found each other." She nodded, then reached for his hand. They walked inside and sat at the same booth. This time, she ordered hot chocolate confidently, and he got the same for himself. While they waited, she pulled out a small drawing she had made that morning. It was of them standing under a tree, holding hands, with the word family scribbled in shaky block letters above their heads. He stared at it for a long moment, then looked at her. "You drew this for me?" She nodded. "It's us. Do you feel like we're a family now?" She didn't even hesitate. "You're my dad." He folded the picture and tucked it into his wallet without a word, right where most men kept business cards and receipts. That small paper meant more to him than every contract he had ever signed. When they returned home that night, he hung the drawing on the wall above her bed. She asked if they could frame it, and he promised they would. The story of their lives didn't end in a courtroom or a dramatic moment. It continued in the ordinary details: homework on the kitchen table, mismatched socks, pancake sundaes, whispered dreams at bedtime. Ryan no longer saw her as a responsibility that had found him by accident. She was his choice, and he was hers. He still worked. He still owned companies, still signed deals, but now, his most important title wasn't CEO. It was Dad. And in the quiet hours after she fell asleep, he sometimes stood in the hallway just outside her room, listening to her breathing, marveling at how a man so certain he needed nothing had somehow ended up with everything. In my view, the ending of this story is a quiet triumph, not because everything becomes perfect, but because something deeply human and transformative happens in the most ordinary moments. What makes it powerful is its honesty. Ryan doesn't become a hero by saving the world. He becomes one by choosing to show up for a child who had no reason to expect kindness. That decision, simple and spontaneous, unravels the carefully built walls around his life and reveals a version of himself he didn't know he could be. Lily's presence doesn't just change him, it restores him. Her trust is not easily earned, but once given, it redefines what success and purpose mean for a man who had once measured everything in numbers. Their bond grows not through dramatic gestures, but through breakfast, bedtime stories, shoelaces, and drawings. That's what makes the story feel real. It reminds us that love doesn't always arrive with certainty. Sometimes it shows up when we least expect it, and asks us to stay. The happy ending doesn't come from solving every problem. It comes from two people choosing each other every day, and finding home not in a place, but in a relationship that neither of them saw coming. That's the kind of ending that lingers, and feels earned.